She was crying like I had never heard a woman cry before in my life.
And I just cried for weeks and weeks. Everything reminded me of a baby.
And I kept trying to get up from the table and look to see what was in that jar.
I was dealing with the loss of my unborn child and I didn't even know it.
I believe that my life was spared that night just so that I could be here right now and say abortion hurts women.
Whisper, be silent no more.
Welcome to Faces of Abortion. I'm your host, Molly White, and today I have a very special co-host, Mary Lee Mason. Welcome to the show, Mary Lee.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be doing our closing segment with Julia Holcomb, who will be talking about hope and healing and restoration that comes through Jesus Christ after her abortion. And now we'll be going to the interview with Cindy Collins and Julia Holcomb.
Welcome back to Faces of Abortion. We have the second part of Julia Holcomb's story, which is a powerful story of truth, of abortion, of forgiveness, of healing and recovery. Julia, welcome, and thank you again for being with us on Faces of Abortion.
Thank you. It's nice to see you, Sandy.
I want us to go ahead and start about how your story came out. I know that Steven Tyler began to tell his story about abortion in his life, but there was a part of that story that included your name. So Julia, why don't you go ahead and pick up your story from there?
I never expected to speak in a public way about my abortion experience. My husband and I have been married 31 years, and I had told Brad about my relationship with Steven and my abortion. But we had made the decision together not to tell our children. I can remember being so wounded by my abortion. I didn't want that to touch my children in any way. And so we had not told them. Steven wrote about our relationship in 2 of his books. In the first book, he did not give my name, so I had the freedom to just remain silent. I didn't have to say a word because no one would know that it was me. After he became an American Idol judge, he wrote a second book. He described our relationship and his memories of my abortion. One thing he did use was the words, "Jesus, what have I done?" in relation to my abortion. And that even though he sees it as a little differently than I do, he did acknowledge regret. And that was something that I felt was he did in a very poignant way. Certainly any parent who is post-abortive understands those words, "Jesus, what have I done?" and the regret of an action that you can't take back. But when Steven wrote about my abortion the second time, he used my name in his book. And after that, one of the tabloids, Star Magazine, wrote an article about Steven. They used a photograph of the 2 of us together. They discussed our relationship and my abortion in that article. And my oldest son read it and recognized his mother in it. It was just a shock to my children. We had to do our first Silent No More talk at home in our living room. And I had to tell my sons that I had been in a relationship with Steven Tyler and that I had had an abortion as a young woman. That was a very difficult night. We shed a lot of tears. And my boys had been at our local Planned Parenthood with their local Catholic youth group, praying the rosary for the women who were going inside and offering sidewalk counseling. So it was a hard thing for them to grasp that I had been a woman who had had an abortion, that they had a brother that they would never meet in this world. That night was difficult. But one of my sons was a high school senior, just a wonderful young man. He's about 6'2", he has beautiful red hair, and he is a wrestler. He's a real big boy. And he had tears in his eyes, so did I, but he came over, he almost picked me up in his arms. He hugged me and he said, "Mom, I love you and I forgive you." And that was such a powerful moment for me. I felt that somehow we were going to get through all of this, and that if my family was going to be okay with knowing all about my past, that I was going to have to find the courage to share my story in a more public way. And I wanted to be sure that my children knew without any doubt that I regretted my abortion with all my heart, and that I see each one of them as a precious gift from God.
And Julia, tell us, I know that you had read an article by Kevin Burke with Rachel's Vineyard, and then the Lord led you to a healing retreat with Rachel's Vineyard. Could you share with us a little bit about that?
I was very touched by Kevin Burke's article that he wrote, Jesus, What Have I Done? He discussed Stephen's description of my abortion. And I decided to respond to him in the letter that I wrote. It was a brief story of my experience called The Light of the World. It was published on LifeSite News. And Kevin was so good, he invited me to attend a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. In an email, he suggested my husband and I take a retreat together. And I remember thinking, well, that's nice, but I didn't really think I needed to go on a retreat because I had been to confession, I had been baptized, I had embraced forgiveness from my heart. I was very open to life within my family and my marriage. And I felt, I made a yearly retreat as part of one of, my spiritual commitments. I make a retreat each year. So I felt, that was nice of him to suggest a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, but I didn't know that I really needed to carve out a whole weekend for that experience. But I went to Holy Hour. I make a weekend visit to the Blessed Sacrament. I pray for an hour with my family. And that weekend, I felt Jesus just speak to me in my heart and say, Julia, I want you to make this retreat. I have a gift for you. And I told Brad that I felt like Jesus wanted me to go on this retreat. So the two of us made the decision to go together. And that was very important, that my husband has never participated in an abortion in any way, but he made the decision to go with me as a support. And he got so much out of that retreat experience as well. I personally received so much grace that weekend. I felt like it was an encounter with Christ. I was able to embrace Christ's forgiveness and healing. I was able to name my son Michael and memorialize him. But my husband also had been very deeply burdened by bitterness and anger toward people in my life who had been involved in coercing me into that abortion. He really struggled with forgiveness. And it was, not a good thing in his life to have that bitterness. At our Rachel's Vineyard retreat, he was able to really embrace forgiveness. And I think it was a watershed moment for him as well. So I would encourage any woman or any person who's post-abortive, maybe if you're in a relationship with someone who's had an abortion, or if you're married to someone who's had an abortion, or if you personally are post-abortive, consider having a healing experience like a Rachel's Vineyard retreat or Forgiven and Set Free. There's many good programs out there that deal specifically with post-abortive healing. And sometimes we can think that we've already worked through it, we've made a full recovery, but God has something else to give us. That was what I found when I made my retreat.